Hey everyone, this is Elon from the Eggard podcast, and I'm here with Sergeant Mark. And I'm very grateful to have you on today. I think it's going to be awesome.
I
I don't
appreciate that. I appreciate the invite, sir. I definitely was been looking forward to this.
awesome. I don't know if you want to give a little background about yourself and your history in law enforcement, so that people can
Mhm.
better understand.
Oh, for sure. So I am a sergeant from LAPD. I've been on for 18 years. I'm sure that we're going to get into a lot of this today. I screwed up a lot when it comes to like my health, my fitness, like putting my basically like everything on the back burner, and I kind of like let my job be the excuse. Since being open to like not only personal growth, personal development, awesome podcasts like yours, it's kind of like taken me to the next level in all aspects. And what's funny is like when I focus on even let's just say my health or my mental, physical, emotional health, or like connecting better with my family, how much more I can help serve people out there in the community when I set better boundaries and I don't let my work kind of like get in the way. So a lot of my story has to do with that and in losing focus many, many times. So I like to think that I like to give people a shortcut through all of that struggle because it's great. You can learn from a lot of the struggles that you go through, but at the same time, you can also learn from other people and what they've gone through so that you don't have to go through it yourself.
Well, I liked something that when we were talking previously,
Mm-hmm.
you had mentioned that you don't like getting too caught up in the negativity of everything going on nowadays, and I
Mm-hmm.
find that really inspiring, especially you being in law enforcement
Mm-hmm.
with all the rhetoric around it and all the controversy and even the Chauvin trial right now. And so
Mm-hmm.
you found a way to kind of keep your mind healthy, your body healthy. I'm hearing that you right now what you just said is essentially that you went kind of down a path that wasn't healthy for your body and your mind, and then you
Mm-hmm.
completely turned it around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm dealing with health issues right now. I'd love to hear more about that in terms of kind of what happened and how you kind of corrected it.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I too am dealing with health issues. I have an autoimmune disease now
Me too.
called. Oh, really? What do you got?
I have so I started off when I was young. I had psoriasis, and then it turned into psoriatic arthritis, and then
Mm,
also affected my intestines. And they're like, you also have Crohn's or colitis,
mm,
ulcerative colitis, because I started having the typical colitis symptoms, which are
mm-hmm.
not fun.
Yep.
And then they actually just stopped worrying about a specific diagnosis because it started
Mm-hmm.
affecting my ears and I started going deaf. So I have scar tissue building up
Mm,
on my ear, started affecting certain organs. And they're like, at this point, your body's attacking
mm-hmm.
itself everywhere. So let's focus on dealing with the immune system in its entirety as opposed to just like a singular issue like your skin or your joints or your
Right.
stomach. They're all connected.
Right, right. What's like extremely impactful for me, not only from that story, is you look like a very fit, very healthy person, and I can tell you, like, well, I have Crohn's disease, so I mean, we probably experience a lot of the same things. I actually developed it about 4 years ago, and they linked it directly to my career because I was kind of like putting so much stress on myself that they ended up developing it and actually came forward. So yeah, but what's crazy is that despite that, like I can still get into incredible shape and like really still focus on that because I know so many more people, and I'm sure you've experienced it too. But like when I go see my doctor, there's like everybody else in the room, and then there's me. And me, I'm healthy. I'm like, I still go through my flares. I still have to. I use Humira, so I have to get injections in my
Yeah.
leg. It like basically suppresses my immune system. So everybody's freaked out about COVID because if I catch it, it won't be a good thing. But at the same point, like I still come with energy. I still bring it like my A game. I still try and show up. I still try and work on my health and fitness because like that's not my excuse anymore. That's kind of the reason why I must do it, right? So it's just a game changer, and what's awesome is seeing people like you who are proving it too. So I developed Crohn's disease about 4 years ago, but before that, like I got to the point where I was 100 pounds overweight. And that was even before I got on the job. And I was just like yo-yo dieting. My thing was like, hey, just tell me what I need to do, and I'll just do it. And so I was eating terrible foods. I was like running on an empty stomach. I was doing all the things to like get myself to lose weight, try every diet known to man, and nothing was working. And what I ultimately found is that a lot of it had to do with my mindset rather than the tactics of doing it. But when I got on the job, I started to give it all to my career, like all of it. Like I was working as LAPD as a gang enforcement detail officer, which means I work all throughout the night. I was serving search warrants in the morning time. I was the court qualified gang expert. I was working so much overtime, and that was like my badge of honor, right? Now it's kind
Mhm.
of like the badge of stupid. At least I feel like it now because that led me down the path of like losing track of my health, losing connection with my wife, like not making the actual important things in my life important. And I was just giving it all to my career and blaming that, as opposed to what I saw people who had a healthy career do is they owned their career when they were there, but then they owned family time and they owned their health when they were there too. And so it wasn't that that there was something wrong with me, or I just didn't realize that was possible. And I started to, allow my career to be that blame. So it brought me down that path of like, of course, not feeling good, not having energy, but really it was like a lot of negativity. I know we were talking just before this. You're like, hey, what are you open to sharing? What are you open to talking about when it comes to like the news and that stuff? And I'm like, to be honest, I don't keep up with any of that. And the reason why is because back then I did, and it would always lead me down the path of negativity. And like, there's this very great principle, and it's like what you focus on grows, right? Yeah. So what you focus on grows. So when you have like negativity, like if I focus on the negative comments that I get, because being a police officer and owning a business and being on social media, let me tell you, I got a lot of great stuff that people post. I'm like, oh man, if I focus on that, it pulls me away from my mission. And it's the same with like the news and politics and all that stuff. I can also focus on like things that allow me to grow, the actual connections that we're making with the community now that are better than ever, like the opportunities that I have when I go out in public and I can really show people what real police are, as opposed to the police that they see behind, the video cameras, the few of us who screw it up, right? And so I want to focus on that. And that just brings more of that to me. And I kind of like, I don't necessarily eliminate the other. I know that I have to know some of that stuff, right? I have to know if I'm going to be deployed in the field. I have to know, but I don't need to be fully into it, because when I do, I feel like I got to take a shower afterwards, because I'm like, man, I need to rinse my brain out from all this negativity. So not only was it like my physical health, but it was also my mental health that was struggling, because I was just like giving it all, thinking that I couldn't rock those other areas of my life, like my family and my health. So that was the spiral that I went down.
There's a couple of things I want to touch on, because there's a lot there that's very interesting. Things that we've all suffered through, at least people with chronic illness, or people who are, I would say that people who were professional athletes, people who were extremely physical, who then can't do that very thing anymore, is that you hyper identify with one aspect of your life. You know what I mean? You are the thing you're doing. Many of us suffer from that. So when you said it, it resonated with me. I did combat sports for most of my life. And then the autoimmune disease doctors told me I had a mass in my spine. I won't be walking ever again. I have to do this crazy experimental surgery. And I was like, oh man, who am I? Who am I if I don't have this thing? And it made me reevaluate myself. I made it through. I didn't listen to the doctors. I didn't do the surgery. I couldn't feel my leg at the time. It was very weird, but it all came back. But it just goes to show you how the mind, and this is the second thing you kind of touched on, which I love, is that the mind, the effect of the mind on the body, that your Crohn's disease was more of an effect of your mental state that then affected you physically, which was something that took me a very, very long time to come to terms with. I thought if something is physically wrong with you, that it meant that it was physically wrong with you. Your mind didn't have a role in that. So I love that you're staying away from the negativity. I get caught up in it sometimes, and it does. It makes you more ill. It affects you physically.
It does.
In terms of your community outreach and the kind of things you're doing, do you want to expand a little bit on that? Because I think that's a really important thing that you mentioned, that you're actually taking action. You see a problem, you see that there's maybe a narrative that doesn't represent all police being perpetuated, and your way of coping with it and dealing with it is not to get caught up in the negative aspect and start debating that end of it, because it's an impossible victory, but to go out and show and be a leader, and like you said, serve and show what it means to be a good police officer.
Right.
So I'd love to hear about kind of just your day-to-day, some of the things you do, some of the experiences you've had, which you felt impacted you in a positive way and impacted others in a positive way. I think that would just be great for people to hear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what I like to do around this, I like to keep it simple. Like, a lot of times people think like when you're wanting to make a change, you've got to like basically create this huge amount of structure and get other people involved and things like that. For me, I just keep it simple, and I just go out there and I do the best that I can. And I try and connect with people on a more human level. Anytime I work in investigations, so I talk to a lot of people. And I can tell you at that point, when there's an investigation open, like you're connecting with people at a time when they're not their best, right? I mean, that's pretty much what we do the whole time. And so one thing I always make sure that I do is I make sure that before I get to the details that I want to ask them about, that they kind of like know that I understand like some of the things that they're going through. And I want them to know that like that's just normal. It's normal to feel that way, or it's normal that they experience that. And if I was in that situation too, I would feel the same way. Sometimes they even come up to me about like, hey, you know what, the officer treated me like this. And our normal reaction, at least that's what I see, is like, oh, well, this is the reason why the officer did that. Oh, did you know that we have tactics that we have to do, that we have to prone you out on the ground, that we have to point our firearms at you, we have to do this. And yes, that's great. You can tell them that later, but I think the first piece you have to understand is you got to get down kind of like in terms of like, what if that was you? Like, how would you feel if that had happened to you? And that's always something that is going through my head. So whenever I'm connecting with somebody, I try and meet them first on like that emotional level, wherever they're at, you know, like it's called tactical empathy. And I just take a second to like picture myself in their shoes and get them to understand that I may not fully understand what it is, right? But at least connect them with them on a point where they feel like I'm just another human being like them. Because here's the thing, like I work with, I mean, we have a lot of police officers, right? And like you said, like a lot of them in the beginning, a lot of them like take it and like, hey, this career is me. Like me and my career, we're together. Like we're not, I don't know if it's just, we're not humans or what, but we like literally take on that persona to mean that it's us. And other people see us that way too. It's kind of like, I don't know, when you're a police officer and for the first time you go out to eat and you sit down, like you can't eat like the normal public because everybody's looking at you and the kids are looking at you and they're pointing at you. And to get them to see that you're just like a normal human, that like, hey, you know, you understand what they're feeling or what they're going through. Like just for me, that's like that gap that gets bridged. That really can now tell you all the reasons why we have to do it and then see what you can kind of do to help bridge the situation. But that's kind of like always my first thing is when I come into contact with somebody, whether it's in the field, whether it's on the phone, like I want them to understand that I'm not just there to check a box, to, you know, complete the investigation. Like I'm there because like I really do want to help them, but I also want them to see that we're all humans and like what they're going through is I would feel the same exact way as them. So when I approach it that way, I always feel like when I leave, like they left me better off. You know, if I feel like I disconnected from them and I pulled something from them and I didn't leave them better off, I feel like I did a disservice, which to be honest, that happens sometimes. You know, sometimes I have a bad day too. I'm talking right now like everything's roses. It's not. Like there's days that I don't have a good day, right? But on the days that I really try and focus and make sure that I give them the best of me, that's what I'm looking to do. And here's the thing, when I do that and other people see that, that is like the ultimate expression of like teaching other people how to do that. So I try to keep it real simple. I try to keep it within me. And yes, I want other people to kind of see me doing that so they can kind of take that as that's the norm. But that's how I want when that person disconnects from the police, that they have this good, positive feeling from it. And that they know that I'm a human being and they're a human being. And we were just, you know, I was doing my best to kind of help them. So I hope that kind of answers your question, but I just like to keep it simple in whatever interaction that I have with that person.
Well, my entire philosophy on any problem or bridging the gap between anyone, and I mean this, but anyone, I mean, no matter how severe the person may hate police and how much that police officer may be in a state of, like you said, rage or whatever that thing is,
Mm-hmm.
could be a terrorist from the Middle East and an American soldier, whatever the gap is, once you start seeing each other as humans, it becomes
Yeah.
significantly harder and harder and harder to cause suffering.
Yeah.
Humans, unless they are sociopaths, have a hard time causing suffering onto each other.
Mm.
Right. And so a lot of the time when we do cause suffering onto each other, it's because we've dehumanized the opposition or we
Mm.
do not see them in the same way that we would see a family member or a brother and
Right.
sister. So if I can get you to see me like a brother and a sister, it's very, very unlikely that you're going to want to do me harm. And so
Right.
I'm a huge advocate of your approach in policing, in terms of, you know, bridging the gap between cultures, whatever that thing is,
Mm-hmm.
that finding the humanity, that Speak Truth video I put out, the one that we talked
That
about
was
previously.
awesome.
But the
Yeah.
entire point of the video was, where's the humanity?
Mm-hmm.
Are police human? Yes. So let's
Mm-hmm.
try and see them as human. And I thought that was the best way to get people to take a step back and say, oh, wait a minute, they are human. They're
Mm-hmm.
imperfect. They feel things that we
Oh
feel.
yeah.
And so I really commend you. I commend you for doing that. And I think what you had said about tactical empathy, number one, it does two things. It de-escalates the situation and causes
Ooh.
the other person to leave with a positive view, but it
Mm-hmm.
also makes the police officer safer,
Mm-hmm.
because you're creating a bond. Do
Mm-hmm.
you think there's a reason why tactical empathy isn't a bigger part of policing in general?
Oh man, that is a great question. I mean, there's so many positives around it, but I think a lot of it has to do with thinking that if you empathize with somebody, that means that you're basically agreeing with them, or that like you're basically saying that you did something wrong. And I think that we got to disconnect that. Like when you can empathize with somebody, when you can like and there's this model, it's called the LEAD model, LEAD, that I was taught through my mastermind. And one of the things is you got to be able to obviously label the emotion that they're feeling and then empathize with them. And sometimes when people think of empathy, like you seeing yourself in their shoes, basically you're saying that you either agree with them or that you did something wrong. And like, that's the reason why. And it has nothing to do with that at all. It's just seeing it from their perspective. I can't tell you the number of times when I have been able to see something from somebody else's perspective, just because like you said, I take a second to think about it and I'm like, like, why does this make 100% sense to this person right now? Like, there's a reason why it makes, like, everything we say makes 100% sense to us in that moment, right? Mm-hmm. And so I sit and I go, well, why does that make 100% sense to them? And then it gives me an opportunity to like see it from their perspective. And then it changes everything. But I guess it's just like a different mentality of like realizing that, well, first off, like connecting with people on an emotional level, like police really don't think about that often. You know, they kind of like run away from emotions, and it's just, I don't know. It's just something, I don't know if it's a stigma or if there's some kind of ego revolved around it. But if they actually realized how, like you said, not only how can they get their message across, not only how they can get people to follow, not only how people can like get connected like that, then they would realize that this is actually the shortcut to getting, you know, to actually, to being able to be connected.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because like, again, these are different examples. You're not dealing with high in my examples, they're not high stress situations. Like my mother worked with, they're stressed, but they're not life endangering. And I think that's where the real switch is. A police officer's life is in danger, so he has to be at a higher state of alert. It's harder to empathize in that moment. What you're doing in that moment is trying to make sure you're safe as well. So there's a certain degree of personal, I guess, reservation to like completely opening yourself up to a person and being vulnerable. My mother worked with kids who had learning disabilities, and the way I noticed her approach to everything was an approach of, I hear you, I understand you, and trying to connect on that level, and then still saying what needs to be done or what needs to happen as an authority figure. But I noticed through her that she just had far better results when people were willing to listen, even though it's a different situation. These are kids with, and again, as a police officer, I imagine there's times where people just are not willing to listen, no matter what you do. But what can we do to take that number from being this and turn it into this, right? And I think that's the future of policing, just even by necessity, because of how much negative rhetoric there is around it, and how even DAs are coming down on police right now, and it's just become a very volatile situation. And I feel bad for police officers. I feel like they're taking away a lot of the tactics that police officers can use that are less dangerous, and then leaving them with only a final kind of resort. I want to touch on something that you go back to the health a little bit and kind of mindset. And you said you like to stay away from the negativity, but I feel like being out there and seeing so much trauma every day, or, you know, getting these calls, these are not happy calls. Like you said, you're seeing people at their worst. You're seeing humanity at its worst all the time. How does that not affect you just in general? I mean, I would imagine that would have a massive toll.
It has a massive toll. I mean, that's kind of why I developed Crohn's disease, right? Because you see things that people shouldn't see, but you see it every day. And so, there's things that like have literally burned into my mind that I'll never be rid of. And I'll never tell my kids or my wife or anything about it, because it's like, you have traumatizing incidents like that. And I can tell you that sometimes, like, just chatting with your partner about it. And what's crazy is like, some of the things that are like the most scary things, like what helped me the most was just laughing about it with one of my partners. And it's weird because it's just like laughter, I guess, is just a way of like getting all of that stuff out of you. But so many times I've also had to see a police psychologist. So I've gone at least six times that I've counted, where I've had some traumatizing things that have happened where I needed to like get some professional help. I can tell you the people who are like the worst off, they try and internalize it and keep it. Like they either just like stuff it down and think that it's going to come back up later, or I don't know what they do, but really like asking for help and getting help when you have those kind of incidents is critical, because in the beginning I didn't do any of that. I mean, it was like, well, if I go see, they're called BSS, behavioral sciences, for LAPD. If I go see them, then like, what are they like? What if they take my gun away? Or what if they say that I'm not fit for duty? Or what are people going to think about me? Or what are people going to say about me? And like, now it's the opposite for me. I'm like, hey, like I need to call and schedule an appointment because I had this thing happen. So, I mean, just like you were saying earlier, like we're all humans, right? Well, any human being that saw that level of like violence and just like weird things, especially for me, when kids are involved,
Yeah.
like, oh man, it's like game over, especially now that I have kids. I'm like, no, I can't deal with that. And you need to like talk about it, and you need to get some kind of like somebody who's a professional to actually help you. I know for me, sometimes that's like that can be a coach. It could be like my partner. It could be a mentor, but sometimes it's like a professional. It's like, hey, this isn't too deep for me to just kind of like take it myself. So yes, it is. It's traumatizing. It's man. And then just the ups and downs of just work, right? I mean, you're going from like 100 miles an hour to like back in your car again, to back 100 miles an hour in a pursuit. And then you're back down again. And just even of that's just terrible for our health. But, you know, obviously somebody has to do it, but we've got to cope with it in the best possible ways. And that is not drugs, alcohol, girls, like all those kind of things that you see some younger cops resort to. Like that's not the positive way of doing it. Some people do, you know, they exercise. Some people do meditation. Some people read books. Some people go join masterminds, become parts, or talk to a police psychologist and do those things. So finding a good out, I think, is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like it. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that police officers go through that the average person can't comprehend or doesn't think about.
Right.
It's a shame. I think there'd be a lot more. We're talking about empathy. I often hear people say, well, it's their job. They signed up for it. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's fine.
Mm,
But they're also doing a job that you and I don't want to do, that
right.
keeps people safe. So maybe we could just take one step back here. And instead of being, you know, so hyper judgmental based off 2-second videos, try and analyze what's actually going on a broader scheme. I do wish that there was more outlets and infrastructure, just in having done these interviews and having explored this heavily since I got involved in this, to help police officers going through PTSD, to acknowledge it more in the police force, to acknowledge officer suicide as a legitimate problem. These are things that are still not dealt with. And I think that's because of bureaucracy on a higher level. There's, there's something you said that was interesting to me also, is that when you had kids, it kind of, now that you have kids, that you can't be around the kid stuff at all. It hits you much harder. How did having kids change you?
Mm. Man, I think every time that I would get involved, like let's say in a child abuse, sexual abuse, some kind of physical abuse with kids, I could like picture my kids, and I would always think of like, how could somebody do that?
Yeah.
And that was something that didn't happen before I had kids. I mean, it would upset me, it would piss me off when I saw it. But it wasn't like I couldn't picture my kids. And when I see like some kids getting some very terrible things done, I'm like, how could you do that to like somebody who's like a part of you? And it's just, it's very emotional in that moment. And man, of course you've got to keep your cool, because you've still got to perform, right? You still got to do your normal police work, right?
That's one area I mean, I'm thankful I'm not a
fun.
police officer. I would not act appropriately in that situation. I might physically really just
Yeah.
do something bad to someone. So I don't
Yeah.
know how police officers hold back in those situations.
Yeah. It's I can tell you it's very tough. Takes some practice. But yeah, but you know what? One thing I wanted to bring up though, real quick, is I want to acknowledge and appreciate you real quick, because here's the thing, like, so we've been having this interview, and I've listened to your other podcasts and other things that you've kind of have put out there. And man, like, you've got to have like some kind of like special drive to kind of do what you're doing right now, in terms of like identifying like a certain population, of course, police officers, and like not being a part of it, but yet still like doing what you can on your part to like spread the word. So first off, I want to say, man, thank you very much for doing that, because I can tell you there's the number of people who are doing that is like fewer and far between. But I wanted to ask you, like, Has that been something that you've always done? Have you been like that kind of person your entire life, or did something happen that kind of made that come into fruition?
So something actually happened. I was, and it's very interesting. I mean, I've had good and bad experiences with police officers. I've had a
Mm,
range, and
me too. By the way, me too.
so I when people are like, "Oh no," like you're just saying that nothing bad happens because you haven't had bad experiences. I have. My brother had a bad experience. Uh, my wife had a bad experience, and actually, in her case, I mean, not to, I'm against identity politics and all this stuff, but it was legitimately a racist cop. That much was very clear by the end of it, and
Mm,
the judge ended up acknowledging that. Um, and so there's been situations that led me to become very negative toward police, right? And so
mm,
I went through a phase where I was very anti-police. That's the interesting thing
mm,
about me. I was very critical of police, and through also from my own anecdotal experiences, and also just from having, and then I started going online and seeing these videos, and I remember it, and then I also had a couple situations where police actually saved my life in many ways, or came to a situation that could have been life threatening. Someone breaking into
mm,
my house with a gun, cops were there, and I felt the kind of empathy you were talking about, where
mhm.
I could tell that they cared about my safety, and
Yeah.
so I had this struggle of there's good cops and there's bad cops, but the bad cops are such a big problem that it
Mhm,
doesn't even justify the good portion of cops. And then I've always prided myself on being a person who is um, data driven, who is seeks truth, who seeks
mm,
to know what's really going on. And I had friends who were police officers. I'm like, these are good guys. And I started just doing a deep dive and analyzing the data because I caught myself going in a direction that I didn't like. I'm like, why do I feel this way? Why do I feel such? Every time I
mm,
open YouTube, I see an anti-cop video. Every time I open the news, I see an anti-cop video. All these 2 second videos, and the data just didn't support what I believed. And the
mm,
truth was that the overwhelming majority of police, we're talking about, and again, data matters, 60 million police interactions a year, 870,000 police officers. We're talking about in terms of like a narrative of they're going out hunting African Americans. False. There's less than in any given year, less than 15 unarmed black people killed by police. I mean, on a bad year where there's a very high crime rate, maybe 20 unarmed African Americans killed by police. And how many of those were in the middle of committing a crime and being actively violent to the officer? So many questionable homicides in terms of how many questionable fatal shootings are there from a police officer to a civilian who is unarmed, compliant, and not resisting arrest per year. And it's like getting struck by lightning 7 times in your life is the statistical
mhm,
chance. And so that really hit me. And then I started, so that led me one step further to start interviewing police, talking to police officers, seeing what they go through, and then really just deep diving into it. And I felt like it was a real shame because the type of information we're fed and the type of fear we're fed, I believe, escalates negative encounters with police officers, which in turn creates situations where police officers are more defensive, civilians are more defensive, and you have a
yep,
higher potential negative outcome, whether that's
yep,
for the police officer or the civilian. And so I really just wanted to bring some attention to the issue and say, we're not helping the communities that we want to help by putting out these messages. We're hurting the communities we want to help.
mm,
And so, why are we doing it? What's the benefit? And it seems like there's so many people who are fear driven nowadays who want to just drive panic. And that's where they feel like their power comes from. They want to drive identity politics. I'm not a fan of identity politics. Um, and again, I think it's just a control mechanism, or sadly, it's something that we take pride in nowadays is being a victim, right? That's something that we
mm.
celebrate. And so, um, I think that just started taking over. So if you, that's, I hate that I gave such a long-winded answer to, but
No,
that's really it.
man, I love that. I love that. And two reasons why I love that. Number one is because a lot of people think about it, but they never do it. Dude, you're the exact opposite. You're like, hey, I have this thing. I'm going to take some action on it, man. So I just want to say I appreciate you for that. And then you used logic to overcome emotion because like the news, YouTube, they're going to show you the videos that's going to get you to view them. Okay. Like that's their job. They're probably not going to show you the video of just the everyday interaction between officers. They're probably going to show you something that's going to stimulate your emotions, right? But you use logic. You went out, you started to do some research. And once again, most people think about that, but they never do it, man. You are a man of action. I greatly appreciate you for that.
Hey, thank you. You know, one of the biggest things I realized about myself, which I then realized a lot of other people also are affected by this, is our inability to not generalize a situation onto a group. right?
Mm,
And it really, like, to separate our personal experience, or to separate something we view which hits us on an emotional level, from the
mhm,
reality of what may really be going on. So when I saw the Chauvin thing, regardless
mhm,
of the information, regardless of the facts, in that instant, my being was so enraged. I'm an empathetic person. My being
mhm,
was so enraged by seeing someone die that
mhm,
there is no judgment. There is no, I mean, rational thought in that moment. Like you're saying, when
mhm,
I if I saw, God forbid, something happen to a kid, there's no
mhm.
rational thought in that moment. You just want to
Right.
do what you want to do. You get enraged. And I think we as a society have to learn. And it's actually what I think contributes to cancel culture and this whole need to judge each other so quickly, because we've just become so self-righteous in our judgment of an instant, right? There's like a guy in a park who has an attitude one day, and all of a sudden it means he's racist. It means he should have, his wife should leave him. It means he should lose his job. It means we should go after his kids and bully his kids. It's like, no, no, no. We're no better than that person. You know what I mean? We
Right.
all have our
Mhm,
moments. I think it's unfortunate when police have their moments, and it's
mhm,
after years of trauma, and it's in an instant that is caught on camera where they're selectively showing that 1 minute or whatever that
mhm,
thing is, that now completely ruins their lives, causes mass protests and riots all around the country, and results in, so the stakes are so much higher for a police officer to be perfect all the time,
mhm,
which is an unrealistic standard.
mhm.
um, and it's just, all these things come together in such a unique way in society.
Yep.
So yeah.
I love it, man. I love
We've
it.
turned the interview around.
No, we have, but I love the way your brain works, man. So, so yeah, sorry I asked you those questions, but man, it's just when you have somebody who has like that, just that brain capacity, but then the action behind it, I'm like, man, I want to pick your brain because I want to find out the things that I can pull away from that. So I appreciate it, man.
Well, you're doing it. I mean, the truth is, the fundamental thing I think I try and do for myself is lead by example,
Hmm.
right? And just be the best version of myself. I don't worry about other people anymore. I can't change
Right.
what people think. I can hope that people can see an example of, I always said, I did a video for men, for masculinity. And this is a big thing
Hmm.
for me. And I think a lot of police officers actually exemplify a lot of the great attributes and virtues of masculinity, because they go into a career where they're serving others. They have to be courageous. These are wonderful attributes.
Hmm.
They have to have fortitude. There's just a bunch of things that police officers inherently have to do, which represent certain virtues of masculinity, which are wonderful.
Hmm.
Um, and so, um, so I made this video about masculinity. I completely lost track of what I was thinking, but I made this video about
Hmm.
masculinity to humanize men, because of that very same problem that I felt
Yep.
society was going down that weird path there too. So it's,
Hmm.
yeah, and so, like, the way you do that is leading by example. I felt like if I could just show positive
Hmm.
examples of men, that it would
Hmm.
inspire other men to be better, instead of judging and saying like, oh, your masculinity is toxic, you're a toxic man, you're this, or you're
Right.
constantly showing negative. You just reinforce negative behavior if you're constantly doing that.
Yep. 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 I'm with you. Actually, my wife and I were just talking about this a few minutes ago about about the power of not only how our action, but like how like even like the beliefs and the things that we do that our kids are seeing, that literally if we want to like actually improve the world, we pass it on to our kids. We pass it on through us taking those actions, making sure that we don't pass any like implicit bias off to them, because like literally it will be through the process of evolution, it will actually work itself out. So I think about that a lot. Like, hey, like the communication that I'm having with my kids, or even like my kids are having with their friends, like that is literally going to shape how the future, how the world is going to be, right? And
Mhm.
so I want to model that behavior. I also want them to hopefully hang out with the right people who also model that behavior. But just when you think about that, like just how far we've come since like our parents to us to now our kids, like we're actually able to pass on the good stuff and try to avoid, or at least teach them about the other stuff that can get them to go down the wrong path, so that they can like not have to have something like that to worry about. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense.
Mm,
um I mean, it's also a selfless view of the world, right? What you just said is a very selfless view. Your top priority is not to yourself, but to the next generation.
mm,
So you're trying to live your life in a way that doesn't put you first, it puts them first. I
right.
think that's, and I actually think that's an obligation that people do have once they have kids.
Hmm. Yeah.
um and so, yeah, I commend you for doing that. Fatherhood's a big thing that I talk about.
Yeah.
just the lack of fathers and kind of the acceptance of it just in society, how it's become so fine to not have a
Hmm.
father. And I'm sure as a police officer, a lot of the encounters you have, I don't know,
Yes.
are with kids who came from fatherless homes or who don't have positive male role models and all
Hmm.
that stuff.
Yes. 100%.
It's very troubling. You said you started a business around this.
Hmm.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So what I found is like whenever I succeeded in certain areas of my life, it had a lot to do with who I was hanging out with, right? Like Jim Rohn says, the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And when I was like out of shape, when I was using excuses, when I was giving it all to my career, the 5 people that I was hanging out with were doing the same thing. And so like instead of me focusing on like the tactics on what to do, like around my health and fitness, I started hanging out with other people who were making their health a priority, making their family a priority, making their career a priority, but setting better boundaries and while also becoming better leaders at work. And so I started to hang out with those people. And it got to the point where like I totally was able to change around my life. Like the things that we're talking about today, I would have never thought would be coming out of my mouth because I just wasn't that type of person. And so what I realized is like it was the power of the people that I surrounded myself with. And so what I did after that is everybody's like, hey, like, how did you lose the weight? How did you do this? How did you do that? How are you saying no to overtime, but yet you're like the go-to person all the time in terms of being in the office? And I'm like, well, it's because of the people that I hang out with. And they're like, well, how can I get myself to hang out with it? Because people are always like, hey, how can I make that happen to me? And you can do 2 things. Number one is you can create it yourself, which is kind of hard because a lot of times the people that you look up to, they're hanging out with people who are their level, right? And so they don't want to necessarily go down to lower levels because they're hanging out with those people and they have higher expectations and they're doing things up here at this level. And so what I decided to do is to put together a mastermind team. So my mastermind team is focused on 3 pillars. The first is our career. And what I mean by our career is we want to make the biggest impact. We want to lead from the front, but we want to set better boundaries so that we're not using our career as an excuse to let the other pillars go.
Okay.
The second thing is family. Just like you, being a husband and being a father is like a top priority for me, even before being a police officer. Like that is priority number 1 for me. And I want to make sure that I prove it, not just by saying it, but through my actions. And so I learned things on how to become a better husband. I learned how to talk better with my kids instead of just asking them like, oh, hi, how was your day today? I ask them, hey, what's one thing that happened to you today that made you smile? And like that question now, it's not just an everyday like, oh, how's school? It just gets them to connect with you more. So like going through different trainings and being part of masterminds to learn about that so that I can become better at connecting with them. And then of course, my health and fitness, not only my physical health, but my mental and my emotional health, like even talking about that. Right. And so what I do is I put together teams of law enforcement officers and first responders into a mastermind kind of group setting like this, where we continue to grow, we continue to stretch ourselves, we continue to be accountable, to show up, and I help push them to actually make what's important in their life important now. Because we all say, oh, later we'll make this happen, or when the kids are back in school, or when this happens, when I'm on that different shift, when everything, like that's never going to happen. Like you've got to talk about what's happening right now. And so that's me. I'm kind of like known as the push coach, so that when people do show up inside of my app and they're a part of our mastermind, they know that I'm going to push them, not because I'm like yelling at them or beating them up, but because I'm like, hey, no, like you said this was important. Now you got to show it with your actions. And we know that everything is not perfect, because trust me, it's not perfect for me either. Sometimes my kids start yelling and I yell back at them and I don't take a second to actually think about it and then react or respond versus react. Right. But at the same time, hanging out with those people and seeing them owning their time with their family makes me do the same thing too. And so it's like this level of just like holding yourself to a higher level and then continuing to grow and become better. And you do that with the people you surround yourself with. So I just create that environment for people.
That's incredible.
Thanks.
And you said it's an app also.
Yeah, we do this inside of an app. And the reason why is because of what we talked about in the beginning. If you're like, I know a lot of like masterminds, they're running like Facebook groups and things like that. Distractions, dude. Distractions all over. You can very easily be distracted. But when you're in like, let's say our app, there's 0 distractions. It's kind of like a Facebook type app, but it's only people that I invite to be in there. And so when you go in there, you can see the news feed, you can see, which members are in there. You can send them messages. You can see my posts. You can see videos I've done. We have live calls every week. Like you get full access to all this stuff without any negativity at all, without like anybody else like creeping in and looking to see what you're doing. Like it's just like this really great safe place where yes, we have police officers and firefighters. We always also have family members. We also have friends in there. So it's not just exclusive to that, but it creates this environment that, like, if you're a positive, growth oriented person, we're going to get you in the group. If you're not, this is definitely not a good fit for you. But having that place off of social media is so critical. So that way, you know, we all do go into social media. I still go into social media every once in a while, but after I do, sometimes I need to spend twice as long somewhere else. I need to spend twice as long reading a book, twice as long listening to your podcast, because you need to like be fueled with that. And that's what I have, is I create that environment for my team inside the app.
So if any law enforcement or anyone wants to get in touch with you to download the app, do you want to give the information now, or should I put a link below in the description?
Good question. So if you go, my website is leofamilyfitness.com, leofamilyfitness.com. There's a link on there on the top for Mastermind. That's also where I house all my podcasts and stuff like that. So that's the best way to get connected for free content, and then also for the Mastermind stuff.
Leo Family Fitness.
Mm-hmm. Those are those are the three pillars. Leo being law enforcement officer, family, and fitness.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. I know Leo's means law enforcement. You know, what's funny? I didn't know that up until maybe a couple years ago. And then I got some emails from people saying, I'm a Leo. And I'm like, I'm an Aries.
I get that all the time. And that is such a great, because what I do is when I connect with people on social media, I say, hey, my name is Mark. I'm a Leo. Like, you must be one too. And I instantly know if they are or not, because they're like, no, I'm Sagittarius. I'm actually Sagittarius. I'm like, all right, cool. Have a great day. Because I know that obviously they're not a law enforcement officer, right? But if they're like, yeah, I'm from North Carolina or from wherever, I'm like, okay, now, you know, it's kind of like code name, but yeah, more people are starting to get to know that now.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, I think this has been wonderful. I'm really thankful to have had you on.
I appreciate it, man. And like I said, not only the action that you take, but just like how you think about things is freaking game changing. If we had more humans like you on the planet, dude, oh my God, maybe you should run for president. I don't know. I'm just saying, but you ask great questions. You're a great interviewer, and I just appreciate the opportunity to come in here and chat with you for a few minutes.
Well, you're welcome back anytime. I appreciate it. All right. Thank you.